Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the news that's on everyone's lips at the moment, Elon Musk's buyout or attempted buyout of Twitter and the implications, either way, that this may have for the globalist narrative and the entire globalist propaganda machine, which is effectively 95% plus of the Western media and social media landscape. So there's not maybe one or two. No, I don't think there's a single channel in the whole world that you could say isn't completely controlled by the globalists in terms of the narrative it pushes, which is obviously in support of the globalization project, or has been infiltrated at least partially. So there are still a few media outlets that permit independent journalism, but really not very many. And the social media space would have allowed that, but the big social media tech firms, fully supported by the big financial firms and so on, and the globalist controlled politicians, they effectively vanquish and shut down and deperson anyone that doesn't support the globalist project. Not only do you have to support the globalist project, the propaganda machine must destroy and denigrate anyone that even questions it, let alone opposes it. So, and I think we need to go back just a little bit here. The globalist project, when it was just a gleam in the eye of some ideologues back in the 1970s, or even the late 1960s, they had a number of sort of goals that really were aspirational at the time: to destroy trade unions, destroy the nuclear family, and to eradicate market competition, and to eradicate the marketplace of political ideas. Those were the big four goals that they had. And in order to do that, they either had to present their arguments in the marketplace of ideas, and see how they went, and if they were good enough, and they could argue it persuasively enough, and if they could prove how it was a better way of doing things, then their ideas would have won out. But really, they were selling nothing other than a very self-serving view from a small elite of how they wanted to order the world to suit their own ends. So they gradually started turning politicians, Western politicians, because it's you got to go where all the money is, and so they wanted the white Western economies. They wanted to infiltrate those and take control of those. So they started infiltrating the body politic with politicians that were sympathetic to the globalist project, or were owned by the globalists, or were corrupted by the globalists, as in bribed. Lots of nice jobs for their kids and relatives and mistresses and so on, waterfront properties and all sorts of financially aggrandizing inducements. So they gradually worked their way through the body's politic of the Western world, starting with the bigger economies, the United States, and working sort of down from there. And they were also simultaneously picking off various journalists, so they could have the number of politicians on side was growing, and they were supported by these number of journalists that had similarly been turned. So they had quite a rate of success there, but it was never enough. And I think they realised, certainly by the early 2000s, that they really had to control pretty much the entire spectrum of the body's politic in the West. And I think they'd realised this earlier, but it was the extent of it. They couldn't just control most of it or part of it. They had to control all the major parties, and all the politicians likely to achieve high office had to be controlled by the globalists and the globalist machine, using the early iterations of the Davos Forum and the World Economic Forum and so on. and picking some pretty simple-minded people like, Justin Trudeau, substitute drama teacher. I mean, what an intellectual lightweight, and they could control him and use his family name and so on. So, and they also got that journalist at the time, Chrystia Freeland, and there's two really lightweight. I mean, they're both fucking morons, but they're the sort of people, and others, the sort of people that they can take in and control and let loose as a globalist project enforcers and in support and furtherance of the Globalist project. So they pretty much had closed down the marketplace of political ideas by the mid to late 1980s. It was pretty sort of much shut down there. Or they were in the process of completing that shutdown. And you notice there was a big change across the world where the idea of different solutions to solve problems, to the financial goals, the outcomes, they started to move together and merge, so that so the difference between, what's the difference between Republicans and Democrats today, for example? Both really, whether it's clandestine or overt, they both support mass migration. They both support illegal migration. They both say, well, once the illegal immigrants are here, we can't really send them away. We'll send a token few thousand off to make it look good, but the rest can stay. We'll give amnesties. We'll do that. So they're all on board with everything from transgender bathrooms to white supremacists are everywhere. Hitler is around every corner. This sort of thing. So they're really all on board with that, and the whole once they'd achieved that, then the journalists and the media establishment took a little bit longer to bring under control, given how it's not just confined to one, two, or three political parties. It's very spread out and disparate and all over the place. So it was a tougher job. But as social media sort of took off and there were some big central players there, then all the commentary had to be funneled through those tech giants, and that's where the globalists could come back in and take control of it again. So probably around 2008, 2009, they really had control over 95% plus of any material that was being put out there. So they controlled all the body's politics. So there was not one sovereign government, in the West by, say, 2008, 2009, even earlier than that. And it was the outliers, the ones like Australia and New Zealand and that sort of, they were the last ones to be taken out. But the bigger ones like the United States, Britain and so on, they were the earlier ones that the globalists needed to take control of. And the time they were doing this, you add up the sort of the white Western economies, including the United States, and that was close to 50% of the world economy. So all bottled up in half a dozen or so countries. So it was a definite first point of control that the globalists needed to put in. But the media machine was the media narrative, or control of the media narrative, was really essential, and I think it was tantamount or equal to a political an informational coup d'état, seizure of power without the consent of the people here. And it was a top-down coup d'état, not a coup d'état of people on the street, as say the French Revolution, for example, might have been. So this control of the if you like, the globalist publicity machine had to be complete. Globalization was unsaleable. It is an unsaleable project. It delivers nothing to the white people of the world and the richest nations. It guarantees reduced standard of living. It guarantees complete eradication and destruction of white Western culture. It delivers nothing to white people. Standards of living are lower. Your children and grandchildren will have a much lower standard of living than you did, or your parents did. So it's a complete remaking of the Western world to suit 1 in 500 people to think they've got the right to fucking run the universe. The masters of the universe thing. So because the Globalist Project is so unsaleable, and it is, again, it delivers nothing of benefit. You will own nothing and be happy. I mean, what sort of bullshit is that? I mean, for goodness sakes. So the loss of a free press means that the globalists didn't have to answer any difficult questions. Once they got the press under control, and there was they weren't being questioned. There was no negative coverage of the globalization project or the politicians that were under the control of the globalists. So once they'd achieved that, then they picked up the pace of the globalization project, forcing it on the people. And without the consent of the people. Things like democracy and the rule of law, due legal process, all these sorts of things just get in the way of the globalist project. So they have to undermine them and get rid of them pretty much in any way they can. But it's hard to do if you've got politicians that represent the people and you've got a media that's watching you and critically pointing out, say, hey, what are you doing there? That's unconstitutional. What are you talking about? So they had to get rid of all that and all that scrutiny, all those difficult questions, because the globalist project is simply indefensible. So they have to do that, and so they achieved that control of all of the Western governments and global control of the media narrative. And so there's almost no criticism. I mean, you might get some outliers like, Tucker Carlson, for example, but really you just don't see the criticism of the globalist project and those who enforce it and further it and support it and enable it. And this is what the globalists need. The globalist project cannot go ahead unless they have that level of control over the media. And the idea of any sort of revolution, whether it's top down or not, any sort of revolution requires control of information. Even when the communist Bolsheviks seized power in Russia in 1917, or any revolution like that, what's the first thing they do? They take over the telephone exchange. They take over the telegraph exchange, the way of transmitting messages back in the 1917 in this case. So that's the first thing they do. They take control of the major newspapers. So goon squads go out just to take control of these things so no one else can use them. If you've got control of the information and the flow of information and what is said and what the people can hear and thus very much influencing what they think, then you've got a pretty good chance of pulling it off. If you don't have that control, and you have to compete in the marketplace of ideas. We've got the best ideas. This is why this approach is best for everybody and will achieve a better outcome for you. Then, as in the communist revolution and as with the globalists today, they cannot sell that, assuming they're accurate about it. They cannot sell that message. And what are they going to tell the American people? We're going to bring in 10s, 20s, 30s, 50s of millions of people, illiterate peasants from the third world. And we're going to reduce your standard of living. We're going to make the place more crowded and dirtier. We're going to concrete over more green spaces. We're going to, make sure your kids have much less of a future than you've got. We're going to make sure you're getting lectured about how evil and bad you are every day by transgender black lesbians. Excuse me, no one's going to vote for that. No one's going to go along with that. So they can't win with ideas. They can only win through censorship, which is why they've taken over the entire media establishment, abetted by the big financial houses and so on. Now, politicians are very sensitive to being criticised and exposed for what they do. And the reason politicians are still pushing ahead with the globalist project, under the instruction from the globalists who are behind the curtain pulling the strings, the reason that they're doing that or able to do it is because they're not being embarrassed and exposed. They're not being questioned. I mean, you look at some of the rubbish Biden and his flack and shills come out with at and elsewhere around the world. Boris Johnson in the UK. Some of the rubbish they come out with, and they're not questioned. The media doesn't ask, hey, they'll maybe some softball tame questions might get asked here and there, but no serious question follow-up. There's not the editorials talking about how useless they are and how destructive the policies are, and how much it's going to reduce the standard of living of Western people. There's none of those editorials. Yet there should be. The entire media landscape should be awash with those editorials pointing out just how fucked up the Globalist project is and how sinister it is, and how they have to do it behind the curtain in darkness. I mean, the assholes. So this is something that information control is central to. Now, they know that if they lose control of the narrative-making propaganda machine, they know if they lose control, the gig's up. The gig is up, and they know it. They know how unsaleable globalization is. They know how unpopular it is, given that the presidential election in 2016 quite shocked them, I think. And the Brexit thing, they know that the people will vote against globalisation if they're given that option. So the purpose of controlling the body's politic and controlling the media narrative is to make sure that the public do not have that option. Do not have that option. They can't discuss it, they can't talk about it, they can't think about it, and they don't have that option, to the point where a sitting elected president of the United States was taken off social media. I mean, that's unbelievable. Whether you like the guy or not, or believe, or support the policies or not, he was the elected president of the United States and was taken off social media. It's insane, but it gives you, or illustrates, the extent to which the globalists need and must have complete control of that narrative machine. So coming now to Elon Musk, if Mr. Musk takes over, certainly on the balance of probability, it's likely to happen, takes over Twitter and turns it into an open platform, then where there is a free exchange of political ideas. Because remember, the market for political ideas has been completely shut down. The globalists have to have that. So if the market for political ideas is open, then the globalists will lose, and they know that too. So if Mr. Musk takes over Twitter and turns it into a free exchange of ideas, then it's the beginning of the end for the Globus Project. And that's a good thing in my view. Now, don't think that the globalists aren't also aware of that. They are. And they know if they lose this one, then the gig's probably up for them, and it won't take long for the... So they've got a couple of options here. If indeed Mr. Musk is successful doing that, then they have to double down with the brutality stuff, arbitrarily arresting people, and they've got to go into super COVID lockdowns. They've got to find another way of stopping it. Anyone with a computer who isn't a registered globalist supporter will lose their internet access. They're going to have to go that crazy. But their better bet is to try and stop Mr. Musk from getting that. So you can imagine there's going to be, as we speak, Department of Justice goons and ferals will be running around desperately trying to find a time when, there was Mr. Musk dropped a cigarette or butt or something, anything, it won't matter, no matter how small. Right now they'll be trying to scare up as many women as they can, frail little 5 foot tall, 85-pound young women to say, now, are you prepared to say that he acted inappropriately, or that, you can just imagine they will try everything to embarrass, undermine him, discredit him. They'll use every legal means. They'll be trying to find every bit of paper he ever got near or touched to see if it transgresses some obscure law. They'll be trying everything to try and stop him from what he's doing. So I hope he's got a plan B where maybe he can put someone else out front and fund them to do it. And it doesn't really matter how he does it, but as soon as he breaks up the monopoly on the globalist narrative and the globalist propaganda, then again the Globus Project is as good as dead in the water, because it's completely unsaleable. Now, when politicians are subject to serious scrutiny, serious questions and embarrassment, there's a lot of politicians that are going along with the Globus Project because they fear the consequences if they don't. There are some that are really on board with it. There are others that are owned. There are others who've been compromised. Maybe there's an indiscretion from the past that'll be used against them. I think there's quite a few would fall into that category. But once the market, the political marketplace for ideas is open, and the globalists lose control of the narrative, then politicians are going to be exposed, questioned, embarrassed, shamed for their policies or lack of policy position or piss poor policies. It doesn't matter, but they're going to be exposed. And I think a lot of these politicians sitting on the fence are going to suddenly grow a pair and decide that they're now able to sort of not grudgingly, in the shadows, go along with the Globus project and actually start representing the people again. And it'll have a cascading effect. Once a few stand up and act boldly in this, and then more will, and eventually we can bring the Globalist project to an end. And goodness me, not before time. You've been with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for listening.